The first African American ordained in the first class of Roman Catholic deacons in Alabama. An oral history of the life and service of Reverend Mr. Alexander Francis Moore, an artist for God. That is Deacon Moore in the center of the screen. The church building in the photograph on the right is St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church in Mobile, Alabama, where Deacon Moore served for many years. The watercolor painting pictured on the left is one of Deacon Moore's many renderings of the St. Francis Xavier Parish. It is one of many pieces of art created by Deacon Moore. Deacon Moore's artwork typically reflected people, places, things, and ideas that had great meaning for him. Deacon Moore had a great love of the parish of St. Francis Xavier. It was the institutional base for much of his life and service. Deacon Moore's love of his Catholic faith and the parish of St. Francis Xavier specifically was part of and reflected his deep love for God. As a Catholic, Deacon Moore understood God to be present in some fashion all around in the majesty of the world and people and everything as created by God. Deacon Moore's lifetime of service as a servant leader and an artist express his love of God and all of God's creation. The life and service of Deacon Moore are and would be remarkable within any given context of place and time. However, in the contemporary U.S. context of the Black Lives Matter movement and the continuing violence that persists in landing on people identified as racial minorities, including African Americans, Deacon Moore's lifetime of service takes on additional significance. Today, according to Pew Research published in 2015, American Catholics are about 59% white and about 3% black. Deacon Moore was part of the 3% of black Catholics in the U.S. Unfortunately, as reflected by the Black Lives Matter movement, racial discrimination persists today across U.S. society's institutions, including faith-based organizations like the Roman Catholic Church, notwithstanding the race relations statement put forth by the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops in 2015, which condemns racism as both sinful and abhorrent. Expressed through his art and his labor, Deacon Moore's life of love for God is a testimonial. A testimonial is a type of life history that illuminates how the practices and structures of everyday living are changed and have potential to be transformed into more equitable and inclusive or democratic forms of living and interacting. Within the framework of life history as testimonial, it is ordinary people like you and I, dear listener, and people like Deacon Moore who make these transformations toward more equitable conditions as we regularly interact with others, make decisions, and act on our surroundings. Talking with neighbors, for example, across privacy fences, volunteering and working with others on the annual festival committee. People change things as they live out their everyday lives. Deacon Moore is pictured in this screen enacting many of the activities that made up his daily life of routines related to his role as a deacon and as a parishioner, as a sibling and family member, a father, a foster parent, and a neighbor. Testimonial is a word that has Latin American Spanish roots and is related to English, literally translated as testimony, the act of testifying or bearing witness of a struggle to survive and thrive. Testimonials provide a means for those people and groups who have historically been silenced or not been seen as legitimate and worthy of having standing to speak, to insert themselves and their voices into the realm of accepted official public discourse or narrative and policy. Importantly, scholars have noted that to speak of religion is to speak of race, just as to speak of race is to speak of religion. Race and religion are so deeply and historically intertwined that they are largely fused together. Religion in its institutionalized form emerged in the modern age as a product of colonial contact and conquest by the West of indigenous peoples throughout the world. One of the reasons that racism is enduring despite increasingly progressive social attitudes is because religion has historically helped to justify it. Deacon Moore's lifetime of art and labor in the service of others pushes back at and works to transform the historical reality that to be Catholic was not to be black. Although Deacon Moore spent most of his ministry working from St. Francis Xavier Parish as a kind of home base for outreach elsewhere, it was instead St. Peter Claver Parish where he was baptized as an infant and raised and attended St. Peter Claver Parish's school as a child. Deacon Moore grew up in the area of downtown Mobile, referred to by the local community as Down the Bay, in reference to the proximity of the neighborhoods to the waters and docks of the Mobile Bay. St. Peter Claver Parish and its school were established and specifically served the African American Catholic community down the bay. It was located literally blocks away from St. Vincent de Paul Parish, the white Catholic parish. St. Peter Claver Parish was closed by the Archdiocese of Mobile in 1971 to merge with St. Vincent de Paul and thus become the newly desegregated Prince of Peace Parish, at the time unofficially and ironically called Price of Peace Parish because of the resistance of some white Catholics to the presence of black Catholics in their midst. Today, Prince of Peace Parish is an all-black parish, and a new parish called St. Vincent de Paul has opened in another area of Mobile County, a historically white area. Interestingly, it was the black Catholic parish of St. Peter Claver that carried the bulk of the load of racially desegregating into the white parish of St. Vincent de Paul in this part of Mobile's Catholic community. When St. Peter Claver Parish closed in 1971, some of the former St. Peter Claver parishioners remained in the Down the Bay area neighborhoods of Mobile and became part of the newly formed Prince of Peace Parish, even as its white parishioners moved out. Other parishioners from the former St. Peter Claver Parish, including Deacon Moore's family, moved from the Down the Bay area to Toulminville area of Mobile, where they joined the small but growing number of black Catholic families at the previously all-white St. Francis Xavier Parish. Pointedly, many of the first black Catholic families who moved into the then all-white St. Francis Xavier Parish noted very emphatically that they do not recall experiencing at St. Francis Xavier the strong resistance of some white Catholics to their presence and participation as they moved in. St. Francis Xavier unofficially and slowly desegregated over time without much fanfare, unlike the dramatic exit of some white Catholics from the newly established Prince of Peace Parish and other parishes in Mobile's Catholic community. Pictured here are some of the first black Catholic families at St. Francis Xavier Parish, including my husband's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Reginald and Lillian Harris. The Mr. and Mrs. Leroy and Dora Davis family is also pictured here on the day of their daughter's first communion. Also pictured here in the top left is beloved St. Francis Xavier parishioner Mrs. Agnes Brown, who was honored by the Vatican and the Pope for her work with Father Thomas Wise to racially desegregate the Archdiocesan Council of Catholic Women in Mobile. The parishioners at St. Francis Xavier, with the pastor and Deacon Moore, played key roles in helping to break down racial barriers in the Catholic world and larger society, as illustrated by Reverend Jesse Jackson's visit to St. Francis Xavier, pictured here. St. Francis Xavier Parish thus served as a fruitful context from which Deacon Moore enacted his life and ministry of service and artwork. Once referred to in a local newspaper as the pretty little church on the creek, the parish of St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church was first established in 1867 in the then more rural and predominantly white Tolman area of the city of Mobile, Alabama. The St. Francis Xavier Church building itself was entered into the National Register of Historic Places in Mobile County, Alabama on July 3, 1991. Unlike St. Peter Claver Parish before its 1971 closure, and other parishes serving African American Catholics, Our Mother of Mercy Parish and Most Pure Heart of Mary Parish, for example, St. Francis Xavier Parish was not established originally or specifically to serve African American Catholics. Rather, St. Francis Xavier was racially an all-white parish for much of its earliest history, and as the demographics of the community changed, so too did the makeup of St. Francis Xavier. Deacon Moore's family was not the first, but among the first black families to join the St. Francis Xavier family. Today, St. Francis Xavier is racially all black plus one. This oral history project is written and narrated by Brenda G. Harris, 2019. Paintings, sculptures, and other visual art were created by Reverend Mr. Alexander F. Moore. Pictured on the right of this screen is Deacon Moore in his later years. In the two still shots on the left and in the center, Deacon Moore has some of his paintings displayed for sale at a booth for the 2017 annual St. Francis Xavier Spring Festival. Deacon Moore had begrudgingly consented to displaying his work and selling pieces, but only for the benefit of the parish, and only after much begging on the part of many parishioners, including my husband LaShawn and I, who were the festival co-chairs that year for our parish's yearly major fundraiser. In the center photo, importantly, Deacon Moore's painting of the little girl in the red dress and hair bow being embraced by Jesus reflects Deacon Moore's constant awareness of and care for the community around him, Catholic or otherwise, and their needs and joys and sorrows. This painting reflects an incident wherein a small girl from the area had recently gone missing and was found murdered not far from the neighborhoods around St. Francis Xavier. Although Deacon Moore typically did not sell any of his artwork, he was very generous in giving it away and helping others with their own artwork. Indeed, he is known to have declined an offer of $500 for one of his smallest paintings. Deacon instead regularly gave away his paintings as gifts to those he appreciated and loved. He also was well known for assisting other artists with their artwork. Rather than send them away for interrupting him or bothering him while he worked in the shed he used as a studio for his art, Deacon Moore was also known to allow interested children and youth to watch and at times even create their own artwork if they were interested and stayed around long enough. More than one professional artist today from down the bay was tutored by Deacon Moore. The painting on the right is one that Deacon Moore completed of the Blessed Mother and Child, given specifically to me. Deacon Moore loved to paint the Blessed Mother and Child. The painting on the left, also a gift to me from Deacon Moore, is of Sister Thea Bowman. Deacon Moore knew that I was interested in learning more about the experiences of Black Catholics and gave it to me in response, as he regularly did when he could find any way to assist others around him. Notably, Sister Thea Bowman was a good friend of Deacon Moore's and did spend time at St. Francis Xavier. She wrote letters to Deacon Moore during her illness in the time before her death. Deacon Moore and others from St. Francis Xavier went to Mississippi to visit Sister Thea Bowman before her death in 1990. In this year of 2019, Sister Thea Bowman's path towards sainthood continues to progress forward. As illustrated on this screen, the only times that Deacon Moore willingly sold his art was as part of fundraisers for St. Francis Xavier or for any Roman Catholic organization, such as the Josephites, for example, with whom he was affiliated for many years. One of Deacon Moore's superiors once wrote about him and his art, quote, "Perhaps you could license reproductions from the artist and sell them as fundraisers. He's very unique and impressive," unquote. But Deacon Moore generally refused to sell his art even when his worldly needs were great and greater than he would admit, and often to the frustration of his family and friends. Today, Deacon Moore's oil, watercolor, and other paintings, sketches, sculptures, carvings, and other artwork can be found throughout and even outside the United States because of his generosity with giving away a lifetime of artwork with family and friends, both within and beyond the Catholic world. Deacon Moore's art is the key to understanding his love for God and his fellow human beings expressed through his labor on behalf of others and his artwork. Both Deacon Moore's artwork and his service function to generate and convey his deep love for Black people in particular and for all people, and to challenge the historical, symbolic, and material exclusion and violence consistently faced by Black people in the Catholic Church and other important and valued social spaces. This project is the first stage of a work of love dedicated to and in memory always of Deacon Alexander F. Moore, and completed with deepest appreciation, especially to Miss Cassie Moore, Deacon Moore's sister, and the entire Moore family, and to the whole of the St. Francis Xavier Parish family, past, present, and future, in Mobile, Alabama. In the still shots here at St. Francis Xavier Parish, Deacon Moore is preparing to begin the last Easter Vigil service he served at with our pastor, Father Dominic Oguama, the acolytes, and the parishioners in the spring of 2019. Seeking to follow in Deacon Moore's footsteps, my husband LaShawn now serves as a senior acolyte and likewise assists our pastor with the youth who are altar servers. Deacon Moore paved the path forward for those of us who follow him. He was a cherished mentor whom I was favored to know and spend time with for 5 precious years at our mutually beloved St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church. I am the +1 in the St. Francis Xavier Parish family, honored to be the only white parishioner at this time in the all African American Roman Catholic parish at St. Francis Xavier. I was baptized at St. Francis Xavier at the beginning of Advent in 2015, and my husband LaShawn and I were married at St. Francis Xavier on December 19th that same year by Father Dominic Oguama. It has been my privilege and honor to get to know and learn from Deacon Moore and from all of our St. Francis Xavier Parish family about the meaning of love, faith, and justice across generations and across social differences. Widely known across the U.S. Catholic world, particularly from the banks of the Mississippi River east, across the entirety of the American Southeast and up through New England, Deke, as he was often referred to, aka Abba, our church daddy, as the youth at St. Francis Xavier Parish used to playfully call him, he entered this world with little fanfare or recognition outside of his home and family down the bay in Mobile, Alabama on October 7th, 1938. He then left this world in the quiet of the darkness and early morning hours of September 6, 2019, at the age of 81 years, much to the immense, profound sadness of the many in and beyond his home in Mobile, Alabama, who loved him. The painting on the left was created by Deacon Moore and captures our sense of loss at this passing at St. Francis Xavier and beyond. Deacon Moore was very frail in his last years, yet continued to serve in his ill health, even going to the hospital to visit and comfort a fellow parishioner just weeks before his own passing. He said to her, quote, "I'll be right behind you," as they prayed together to find peace in their common battle against cancer and respective preparations to very soon leave this world for another. Deacon Moore's words proved prophetic. That early morning of September 6, 2019, it was mere weeks before he did follow our sister in Christ from St. Francis Xavier, thus leaving behind the last surviving member of his birth family, his much-loved older sister, Miss Cassie. Alexander Moore was the baby in a family of 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls, born to his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Irwin and Eula Moore, listed in the 1940 U.S. Census as residing at 561 Warren Street in Mobile, Alabama, Deacon Moore's childhood home. For Deacon Moore, love of family was part of how he understood love of God, and hence was always a primary value in his life and his artwork. These oil paintings were created by Deacon Moore of family members and a family friend. 2 paintings of his mother, one of his sister as an adult, one of a niece and nephew, one of a family friend at her first communion, and one of his oldest brother. Deacon Moore never met his oldest brother, Irwin Moore Jr., known as Bubba, who passed away as a small child long before his youngest brother's birth. Notably, Deacon Moore loved to paint portraits because, he said, it was in the eyes that you can glimpse the person's soul, their likeness in the image of God. Moreover, Deacon Moore was largely self-taught as an artist, although he did for a time attend Xavier University of Louisiana to pursue studies in the arts. After completing his K-12 schooling in Mobile at St. Peter Claver School and serving a tenure in the U.S. Army, Mr. Alex Moore had entered the Josephite Seminary, where he made a profession and served as a brother for the St. Joseph Society of the Sacred Heart in Delaware. It was after returning to Mobile that Deacon Moore pursued arts studies at the one black Catholic university in the U.S. and then served as an illustrator for the calendars and Christmas cards at the Josephite Pastoral Center. By contrast to the quietness of the way he entered and left this world, the homegoing celebration of Deacon Moore's life was enormously grand, with all of the honors, trappings, and traditions of the centuries-old worldwide Catholic Church fitting to honor his life of exemplary faith and service as a much-loved and ordained member of the permanent diaconate. A Roman Catholic funeral mass was celebrated at 10 a.m. on Friday, September 13th, 2019 at Prince of Peace Parish in Mobile, where Deacon Moore had grown up. Following Roman Catholic traditions, the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Mobile himself served as the main celebrant of Mass. The Knights of Peter Claver and the Ladies' Auxiliary Corps, the African American counterparts to the racially white Knights of Columbus in the U.S. Catholic world, were likewise represented, and those of the 4th degree participated in honoring Deacon Moore and celebrating his life and service, as seen in this screen above. Father Thomas Wise, pastor of St. Francis Xavier for many of Deacon Moore's years of service at the parish, was a homilist for the Mass and brought prints of some of Deacon Moore's paintings of Sister Thea Bowman to show the audience. Interment followed that day at Alabama Veterans Memorial Cemetery in Spanish Fort, Alabama, with a lovely repast held at the St. Francis Xavier Parish Hall for family, friends, and other mourners. And so it was that the beginning and the end in the circle of life were joined once again on that 13th day of September in 2019 at Prince of Peace Parish, the parish that was once St. Peter Claver, where Deacon Moore had been baptized as an infant and spent his childhood growing up, the parish from which we entrusted our beloved brother into God's hands. Overflowing the grounds, those of us in the crowd of mourners attempted to console each other as we worked to begin facing our loss. Perhaps the full beauty and majesty of Deacon Moore's homegoing celebration at Prince of Peace Parish in the Archdiocese of Mobile, Alabama, cannot be fully grasped without considering the historical backdrop of the times and the city and region wherein Mr. Alex Moore was born and raised and spent his life in the service of others. In October of 1938, when Deacon Moore was born, the city of his birth and its institutions were still firmly organized and operating within the norms and practices of Jim Crow racial segregation. Many of the iconic photos of the Jim Crow era in the U.S. were taken in Mobile, Alabama. These two photos on the right were taken by Gordon Parks in the city of Mobile, just blocks from the then St. Peter Claver, now Prince of Peace Parish, and the Down the Bay area neighborhoods where Deacon Moore was born and raised. These photos show some of the other iconic landmarks and practices in Mobile, which marked the landscape of the city and quality of life during Deacon Moore's lifetime. The bay itself has long shaped life in Mobile as a source of employment in the form of unloading ships at the docks, for example, and the plaque marking the site of the slave markets. The Mobile Bay has also played a role in the military life of the nation, as represented by the photo of the USS Alabama. Although not always as well known as its sister cities of Montgomery and Birmingham, Mobile likewise has a long history of using force, legal and otherwise, to enforce the subjugation of Black Americans. The Ketchum Fountain in Bienville Square is another iconic marker of Mobile and likewise located just blocks away from the neighborhoods down the bay where Deacon Moore was born and raised. The Mobile Azalea Trailmaids today are iconic markers of the city, now racially integrated. Taken by Gordon Parks, the photos on the bottom illustrate life in Mobile and specifically down the Bay Area during Deacon Moore's youth and young adulthood. The U.S. Roman Catholic Church was no less tumultuous as the city of Mobile in the American Deep South across Deacon Moore's lifetime. The photos on the far right and left are representative of some of the challenges faced by Black Catholics across the American South as the desegregating of Dixie and its parishes was taking place in the U.S. Catholic world during Deacon Moore's early formation years in ministry. Pictured bottom center, Bishop Tulin of the then Diocese of Mobile oversaw the desegregation of Mobile's parishes, serving in Mobile from 1927 through 1969 after 40 years of service and given the title of Archbishop in 1954. At his funeral mass, held on December 9, 1976, at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Mobile, Archbishop Tulin was praised for having talked about human rights long before there was civil rights talk, a reference made to Archbishop Tulin's legacy of having authorized and overseen the building and opening of several new churches, orphanages, hospitals, and other important institutions that were designated specifically to serve African Americans, thus earning from his critics the nickname of the N-word bishop. In 1950, for example, when Deacon Moore was but 12 years old, Bishop Tulin oversaw the construction of St. Martin de Porres Hospital in Mobile, the first hospital in Alabama where black doctors could work alongside their white colleagues, and the hospital where my husband was born 9 years later in 1959. Notwithstanding, Archbishop Tulin also denied the request of Joseph Lawson Howes as a seminarian from the Diocese of Mobile. Mr. Howes was an African American Catholic from Mobile who later went on to be the founding bishop of the Diocese of Biloxi in Mississippi. In 1964, Archbishop Tulin rose to national prominence during the Civil Rights Movement when he formally ended racial segregation in all Catholic schools throughout Alabama. Yet, in public, he likewise strongly denounced the methods of civil rights activists, as well as rebuked and penalized Catholic laity and clergy within his jurisdiction, like Father Albert Foley, for example, pictured top center, who in any way participated in or supported activities promoting civil rights. In 1965, Archbishop Tulin ordered the removal of the pastor in the Monlou Island area of Mobile for having allowed Selma's civil rights marchers to use his parish rectory as a headquarters. Such was the volatile context of race, place, and religion in Mobile, Alabama, during the unfolding and development of Deacon Moore's lifetime of service and faith. Deacon Moore recognized and valued history and the significance of history and its consequences on his life and society as it was unfolding around him during his lifetime. This valuing of history, and particularly of black history in the U.S., is captured in Deacon Moore's paintings here of historical figures and events. With the children and rising generations in mind, Deacon Moore often painted portraits of individuals key in U.S. history and particularly black history. Deacon Moore's paintings were regularly displayed and used as part of celebrations in the city and archdiocese as children learned about and honored their history on occasions such as Dr. King's birthday celebration in January, for example, Black History Month in February, and Black Catholic History Month in November. Deacon Moore's paintings reflect the richness, deep feeling, creativity, and beauty of the world around him, particularly the black world, an immense gift of resiliency, hopefulness, joy, endurance, and active creation among and generated by black people in and across generations. An immense gift typically not recognized and to date regularly rejected by the white mainstream at all levels of society around them. Reminiscent of the deep love of Malcolm X and James Baldwin, for example, and in the words of Langston Hughes' famous poem, His Beautiful People, Deacon Moore's art captured this gift and shared it with the world as an endless gift of an endless gift. Deacon Moore's valuing of history, Catholic history in particular, is likewise reflected in his artwork. The portrait on the left is Mother, now Saint Catherine Drexel, known in some circles as the world's richest Roman Catholic nun, an heiress born in 1858 in Philadelphia who became a nun and a social activist at age 31 and used her inheritance of $7 million, $180 million in today's currency, to promote Catholic social teachings. She spent 60 years and about $20 million focusing on the evangelization of African Americans and Native Americans and building missions, schools, and churches to promote their well-being. Deacon Moore attended Xavier University for a time, the Black Catholic University in New Orleans, established by Mother Catherine Drexel, the only nun to found a university. One of Deacon Moore's paintings to remain unfinished, the painting on the right, is an oil painting of Mother Teresa, known for her work with the poor, and also Pope John Paul II, who was head of the Roman Catholic Church from 1978 through 2005, both of whom were prominent figures on the global and Catholic world stages during many years of Deacon Moore's ministry and service. Deacon Moore held a particular love and respect for Pope John Paul II and painted many portraits of him. Black Catholic figures prominent in Catholic history, like Saint Josephine Bakhita, a Sudanese former slave to religious sister active in Italy for 45 years, for example, were also regular subjects of history regularly painted by Deacon Moore. To spend time around Deacon Moore was to know of his deep love and respect for the Blessed Mother, which was also consistently expressed in his artwork and shown in the painting in the top left corner. By 1973, according to his supervisors, as a Josephite brother and at 33 years of age, Mr. Alexander Moore had given nearly 9 years of, quote, totally unselfish labor to the Society of St. Joseph of the Sacred Heart, unquote. That is to say, the Josephites. Working as a remedial instructor and a dorm prefect of youth at St. Joseph's Industrial School in Clayton, Delaware, Brother Alex, as he was known, was described by his supervisors as, quote, truthfully an asset and a good house father, unquote. They also noted, quote, he certainly was a good example to work with the boys whom he guided throughout the years because most, if not all, of the work he has done has been for the betterment of the youth, unquote. The St. Joseph's Industrial School is pictured here with some of the youth Brother Alex worked with as a Josephite brother. After leaving the Josephite brothers and returning home to Alabama, Mr. Alexander Moore entered into what was then the very first class of the newly in place diaconate formation program of the Roman Catholic Church in Mobile. Then, on April 21, 1979, Mr. Alex Moore was ordained at Mobile's Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception by Bishop John L. May and entered the order of the Permanent Diaconate. Deacon Moore served in active ministry for 37 years in what is now the Archdiocese of Mobile, Alabama. Deacon Moore retired from active ministry on January 25, 2016, with a celebration of his service held at St. Francis Xavier Parish, attended by many dignitaries of the Catholic world and beyond. Deacon Moore has been described as, quote, a wonderful example and role model for other men who have been considering the diaconate, unquote. He is an inspiration for current and aspiring African American deacons. In contrast to the times of Deacon Moore's ordination, today there are at least 7 current and aspiring African American deacons. Indeed, today, the Archdiocese of Mobile is grateful for the ministry of an African American permanent deacon who now serves as chancellor to the Archbishop and director of the permanent diaconate. As it reads in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20, verse 16, quote, "Thus the last shall be first, and the first will be last," unquote. Deacon Moore was the last-born son in a family of 8 siblings and the first African-American ordained Roman Catholic deacon in Alabama, in the first class of permanent deacons in the then Diocese of Mobile, Birmingham. In these pictures, Deacon Moore is posing with his siblings, the baby of the family, and then as he participated in the impressive ceremonies of his ordination as deacon. Interestingly, Deacon Moore did not enjoy being in the cathedral, though he was always obedient and present when called upon by the bishop to be there. He instead preferred to spend his time at St. Francis Xavier, where he was assigned, or at other parishes, schools, and more, even as he worked hard to serve the entire African American community in the Mobile area, and specifically all of the Black Catholic parishes. The permanent diaconate is one of 3 functioning orders in the Roman Catholic Church today. These 3 now functioning orders include, first, the order of bishop, second, the order of priest, and third, the order of permanent deacon. At the same time, individuals who are working to enter the order of priest are considered candidates for the priesthood. Candidates for the priesthood also serve as deacons, but as a temporary step that they will pass through on their journey toward becoming a priest. Temporary deacons are thus distinct from the order of permanent deacon. Interestingly, it was Pope Paul XI who restored the permanent diaconate in the Roman Catholic Church after a lapse of 1,500 years, as called for by Vatican Council II from 1962 to 1965. The 3 orders of bishop, priest, and permanent deacon are represented in these still shots on the screen. On the left, Deacon Moore is pictured during his ordination ceremony at the cathedral with Bishop May and other members of the clergy representing the orders of bishop, priest, and permanent deacon. On the right, Deacon Moore's older brother, Father Vernon Moore, is also representative of the order of priests, specifically St. Joseph's Society of the Sacred Heart. At the time of Deacon Moore's ordination in 1979, it had been little more than a decade since the order of the permanent diaconate had been restored and was up and running in the worldwide Roman Catholic Church. Although at the time of its restoration, the Second Vatican Council had said, quote, "We do not have enough priests, so let us have deacons," unquote. The role of a permanent deacon in the church is not one of many priests, substitute priests, parish-based minister, or super lay parishioner/leader. Rather, deacons are called to embody the image of Christ the servant. Deacons represent the church in the community, and at Mass on Sunday, deacons bring the needs of the community to the attention of the church. The dual role of deacons in the community and church make them liaisons who connect the community and the church. Deacons help to make the church and community seem less distant from each other and become more responsive to each other. Deacon Moore spent a great deal of his active ministry at St. Francis Xavier Parish as depicted in the still shots above, where on the left he is assisting Father Thomas Wise to celebrate Mass, and then bottom middle, interacting with the altar servers he helped to train to serve during Mass on the altar. Gathering children, parents, grandparents, and other community members outside of church to teach, lead, and guide and advise was also something that Deacon Moore consistently did in his role as a servant mediator/leader, as shown in the top middle picture, assisting the church and community under the direction of the Archbishop, as shown seated next to our current Archbishop. Deacon Moore's role was thus to serve with the pastor at St. Francis Xavier and other parishes under the direction of the bishop or archbishop, always keeping in mind the larger vision of the church as outward facing and engaging the community, and the parish as made up of, literally, the living stones from the community as being the church. The Roman Catholic Church, in other words, is a worldwide church, while it is simultaneously completely local in what the spiritual, material, and other needs of the actual individual people and families are in the here and the now. Deacon Moore took his duty as an ordained member of the permanent diaconate to heart and well knew the community he was part of and the needs, especially the Black community, and specifically the Black Catholic community. With the specific needs of the people in mind, he proclaimed the gospel with personalized homilies, prayers, and messages. He taught catechism, conducted retreats, missions, and Bible study, preached at revivals. He served the people and families at St. Francis Xavier and beyond by performing baptisms, witnessing marriages, performing funeral and burial services outside of Mass, distributing Holy Communion, preparing the youth for confirmation, and leading, initiating, and assisting with innumerable other parish, local, regional, and other events and activities as a liaison of sorts, moving smoothly between and as part of the community and the church. One of Deacon Moore's special gifts and particular loves was to be responsive to the needs of the children and work to guide the youth in the church and community, be they in the parish, at school, or elsewhere. They chanced to have the opportunity to spend time with him. Beginning in 1965, Deacon Moore worked at the Mobile Area Head Start program assisting young children. He also spent many years working as a house parent and staff member of St. Mary's Home, a Catholic assisted living facility also in Mobile, Alabama. Deacon Moore walked the walk he talked. As an ordained member of the Order of the Permanent Diaconate in the Roman Catholic Church, he felt and lived his vocation. For Deacon Moore, his faith was a way of life that was centered on a robust form of love that was not blind to any type of differences and focused fully on the most vulnerable among us as God's children, especially the rising generations. Deacon Moore never married, having been ordained when he was single. Deacons can be married in the Roman Catholic Church, however, only if they are married before their ordination. Deacon Moore did formally adopt and raise a son. He also formally cared for and raised a son who had been placed in foster care. There are untold numbers of other sons from the community that Deacon Moore took in at some time and raised for some period of their lives, albeit informally. One of these now adult sons Deacon Moore raised informally is now one of the past Supreme Knights of Peter Claver, a deeply honored position in the U.S. Black Catholic history and its organizations. It was his dry humor and sharp wit braided together with his deep care and love for others that now adults recount about their encounters and time with Deacon Moore as someone who played a key role in helping them to become adults prepared to positively contribute to their families and communities. Upon his passing, one young woman remembered about Deacon Moore, quote, "He always showed us love. He was funny. He was kind of a jokester. He always had a joke to tell. He was just a great person," unquote. Notwithstanding, Deacon Moore's wit and love were not always of the soft kind. Rather, Deacon Moore was not unknown to use his cane or any other handy item to energetically encourage children to quiet down or to move to the appropriate place, practice, or procedure with some newly inspired haste born out of surprise. Even with the adults, as these sunflower arrangements on the altar at St. Francis Xavier in the picture here remind some of us from St. Francis Parish. Deacon Moore could be very direct and very specific in his critiques of our actions and interactions. He knew us and loved us, the us as we truly were and are and could be, completely imperfect and given to myriad sins, big and small. It was his ability to see us and love us as we were and are that was truly unique about Deacon Moore. He could see us with all the other layers stripped off down to our full humanness. Just as Malcolm X once said, that it was not about integration or segregation, but about being fully human. Deacon Moore could see us as fully human. He did see our race. He did see our gender. He did see us, our potential and our imperfections. And not all of his words with us were soft. To this day, I wish we had changed out those sunflower arrangements on the altar before Deacon Moore had passed away. For some, Deacon Moore's life of service and its significance may seem to be an interesting, perhaps exotically unique combination made up of his two identities. First, as an ordained Roman Catholic deacon, and second, as an immensely talented artist. The exoticism or distinctiveness of Deacon Moore's life as an ordained Roman Catholic deacon and an artist become visible when we consider that, in general, both being Catholic and being an artist are usually associated with U.S. society's white mainstream and not with African Americans. That is to say, people do not generally expect someone to be an African American Roman Catholic ordained deacon or an African American artist, let alone an African American ordained Roman Catholic deacon who is also an immensely talented artist. Yet it is not the exoticness or distinctiveness of Deacon Moore's life as a servant leader and an artist who was African American that captures the full richness and transformative potential of his labors and legacy. For Deacon Moore, being Catholic and serving as a deacon servant leader and being an artist were not different, distinctive aspects of his being, his identity, or how he saw himself and related to the world around him and saw his relationship to God. As a cradle Catholic, that is to say, someone who was raised up from infancy in the Roman Catholic faith and its traditions, Deacon Moore was raised to look at the world through a sacramental lens that views the world and the realities of daily life as an enchanted place of art, made up of statues, stained glass, rosary beads, holy water, votive candles, holy pictures, and cathedral ceilings painted in architecture, which all, very importantly, hint at and reveal God's presence in the world and God's love of his creations. Art may thus represent, carry, or convey God's presence in the world and God's love for the world he created. For Deacon Moore, then, as a Roman Catholic, his art and his Catholic faith were not distinctive or separate, but fused together to realize a unified, specifically Catholic way of imagining the world, a Catholic imagination. In the Roman Catholic faith, there are 7 holy sacraments. Sacraments with a capital S, as official sacraments or rites, as channels of the grace of God. These 7 holy sacraments include baptism, reconciliation, Eucharist, confirmation, marriage, holy orders, and anointing of the sick. A sacrament is a revelation of the presence of God. Sacraments with a lowercase or small s may include someone appreciating and enjoying the majesty of the Rocky Mountain peaks as manifestations of God's greatness and power to create. In turn, the sacramental lens or perspective or specific awareness that is part of the Roman Catholic way of imagining or looking at reality, that is to say, a Roman Catholic imagination. Within a Catholic imagination or perspective, a sacramental perspective is concerned with the physical and God's love infused into and carried by the physical like a kind of sandwich, as Father Andrew Greeley, a sociologist, has noted. The physical is on the outside or bread on each side of the sandwich, and God's love is the middle of the sandwich at its heart, and that which makes the sandwich both tasty and good for you. The physical outside of this sandwich as sacramental lens means that anything that we physically make or do can be a conduit or carrier of God's love in the middle. For example, my baptism at St. Francis Xavier Parish, with my godparents standing next to me, or my confirmation at Easter Vigil, could be considered the outside physical act, part of the sandwich, with God's love being carried in the middle of and permeating the physicality of the holy water and actions and words that were part of my baptism and confirmation into the Roman Catholic faith. Deacon Moore, in turn, can be understood as having created and enacted his artwork in service to others using this sacramental lens of a Roman Catholic imagination. That is, Deacon Moore's paintings and other pieces of artwork, as well as his art and interactions and actions serving others, preparing the youth for confirmation, for example, can be seen as the physical parts of the sandwich on the outside, which carried, through Deacon Moore's love for the people he served, God's love for these people as God's children. The painting on the left is one of my favorite paintings created by Deacon Moore. This painting of the Good Shepherd exudes divine love as well as the artist's love of God, Deacon Moore's love of God. This painting, then, through a sacramental lens of a Roman Catholic imagination, is a physical object that carries and reflects God's love and human love, seeking toward divine love, to thus become enchanted with the aspirational linking of divine and human love. At the same time, and very importantly, however, Deacon Moore was always and already acutely aware of the violent realities that Black people are and have persistently been subjected to over time. Deacon Moore was deeply aware of realities of anti-Blackness, of religious, civic, cultural, and other social practices, and of the positioning of African Americans in U.S. society and the U.S. Catholic Church as being socially dead, if you will, and therefore not having standing for recognition and the right to speak. The consequences manifested on a continuum ranging from benign neglect to physical harm and expulsion. Deacon Moore was known for, quote, telling it like it is, unquote, and therefore did not shy away from naming oppression and taking the side of and advocating for the oppressed. Because, as W.E.B. Du Bois suggested, Black people have been the faces at the bottom of the well, that is to say, society's well or ladder. Deacon Moore believed that to love Black people was to challenge oppression and thus to love all of humanity. To paraphrase both Maya Angelou and Richard Wright, when Deacon Moore was speaking of Black people, he was speaking of humanity, and thus pushing back on the idea that black people did not and do not merit full acknowledgement and are mere passive objects waiting on others to do for and about them. Deacon Moore recognized and acted in relation to those around him with a respect for their full dignity and capacities to act on their surroundings. He recognized the full beauty as reflected in his paintings of black people as active transformers of their surroundings, not victims, a Catholic imagination and faith with soul. Specifically, to love black people and to fight against oppression is to open up possibilities of acting, interacting, and being not imaginable to those people and groups tied to the historical privileging and dominance of white interests and white people as a collective and their histories, accomplishments, characteristics, and more. When a robust love for black people and their dignity and capacities to act on the tragedies of racism is merged with a sacramental lens and a Catholic imagination, an endarkened black Catholic imagination emerges. To speak of history, for example, has traditionally meant to speak of the accomplishments of white men. However, by taking up the perspective of black people, white people, and all other peoples must also be included. Deacon Moore was not afraid to tell it like it is about oppression, and thus grounded his Roman Catholic imagination of the world and filtered his sacramental lens through his knowledge of the complexities of African Americans' collective experiences with the tragedy of racism and their shared resilience with creating a way out of no way to both survive and thrive in a world historically hostile to black people. Deacon Moore's grounding of a sacramental lens in the nitty-gritty of black people's lives, to use Anthony Pinn's phrase, as a kind of endarkened black Catholic imagination to enact his artwork and his service to others, becomes visible in the ways that his paintings and sculptures, for example, render black people and the Catholic world as endarkened or racialized, instead of seen as universal or colorblind, and therefore by definitional default as white and reflective of white people in a white world. Deacon Moore's subjects in his paintings and sculptures and other artwork reflect in darkened themes: the Blessed Mother, or Jesus with African or African American features, for example. Deacon Moore's art not only ensures that black people are literally visible on the Catholic and cultural horizon in an additive way of whereas previously we had only paintings of Jesus as white and now we also have paintings of Jesus as black, for instance, an additive kind of multicultural pot of diversity wherein black people were previously absent and are now added in and represented. Representation, or visibility, that is to say, and thus having a seat at the table, is an important step, an important first step, particularly in the case of Catholics who are black, and the significance of the Eucharistic table that all are invited to partake from. When we are talking about stories of church, per Tim Unsworth and his recountings of the roller coaster ride through the Catholic Church, because of the antics of people, we are not just talking about Irish American Catholics as people with antics in church, for example. Instead, the endarkened Catholic imagination that can be applied to Deacon Moore's art and labors with and behalf of others, grounded in the nitty-gritty of the collective accomplishments and sufferings of African Americans together, as a practice of freedom and challenge toward the elimination of suffering in the world caused by racial and other forms of domination and subjugation. Specifically, in drawing on his knowledge of black people and the black experience in the U.S. to endarken a sacramental perspective in the world, Deacon Moore created and shared his art and labor in ways that not only included and affirmed the humanity and dignity of black people, but it also made the familiar look unfamiliar, and thus requiring people of all backgrounds, black included, to reconsider everything around them, sketching and painting everyday people, black people, for example, as he did in the 1973 Josephite Black Arts Calendar. Deacon Moore challenged and recreated the familiar of, quote, people presumed to be white people by defamiliarizing and recreating everyday people as black. The concept of people thus becomes more inclusive and humanized because it is no longer exclusively white. Deacon Moore's art thus does the three things that great poetry does. First, it defamiliarizes the familiar and thus allows us to be transported to another place, a place we are not familiar with. Being Catholic and being black might be a new experience for some. Second, it compels us to acknowledge the sufferings and horrors that are associated with the nitty-gritty of the challenges of racism and other forms of domination. Third, it allows us to take what we have learned from our defamiliarizing of the familiar and its anchors in the horrors associated with oppression to imagine, act, and interact toward a different, more inclusive and democratic way of living and being. As part of a black Catholic community, in turn, Deacon Moore helped to likewise defamiliarize the familiar in terms of ordinary functions and practices within the Roman Catholic Church at the local parish level. Teaching catechism and preparing the youth for confirmation, for example, are ordinary practices that Deacon Moore regularly engaged in as part of his labor as a servant leader and ordained Roman Catholic deacon. Grounded in his interactions in an endarkened sacramental perspective or Catholic imagination with soul, these practices become the physical outside part of a sandwich which carry God's love and affirm the beauty, resilience, and creativity of black youth, thereby challenging the anti-black norms, understanding, and practices that often pervade social spaces, including Catholic, read white mainstream, religious, and other spaces. Singing in the choir is another example of the familiar defamiliarized and recreated through a Catholic imagination with soul when enacted by black Catholics. It has been my experience on several occasions now that white Catholics from other parishes in the Archdiocese have expressed a wish to hear and enjoy the sounds of a, quote, gospel, unquote, read and understand African American choir, given the musical product distinctive from other Catholic forms of singing based on white experiences and norms. No matter how one views Deacon Moore's lifetime of artwork and service as a servant leader and ordained Roman Catholic deacon/artist, an artist for God, it must be acknowledged that Deacon Moore was a giant among us. As this project's historical overview of Deacon Moore's life makes visible, Deacon Moore had a vision of the world that he was dedicated to and worked toward realizing all of his days. A vision of the world that was grounded in what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. might have referred to as the beloved community, because of its basis in a robust sacramental form of love and viewing the world. Deacon Moore's art and his labor profoundly reflect his love for others, particularly for black people, and thus for all of humanity. He held close and acted on his understandings of his Catholic faith, grounded in a deep knowledge and valuing of his experiences as an African American and part of the black community and black Catholic community in the U.S. Today, it is difficult not to get choked up and emotional as I see and read the note written to my husband and I, written in Deacon Moore's own handwriting on the top right of the screen. As I see the rosary beads he and his sister gave to us as gifts, one set for LaShawn and one set for me. The aisle pointing to the altar at St. Francis Xavier Parish in the bottom left photo was tread many times by Deacon Moore over the years, but for the last time this summer in 2019. Neither will he again be attending Mass at our Mother of Mercy Parish, the sister parish of St. Francis Xavier pictured on the top left of the screen. Notwithstanding, we are grateful for the legacy of his artwork and his service left for all of us at St. Francis Xavier Parish and beyond by Deacon Moore. Following Baby Suggs from Toni Morrison's novel Beloved, I'm sure that if Deacon Moore were here today, and with regard to the continuing challenges of violence, racism, and more in the world today, and having left to us an immense body of work in the form of his art and his interactions with us and others, Deacon Moore would say to us, and none too gently if we persisted in delaying, "Know it and go on out the yard. Go on." In other words, he has taught us with his art and with his words and his actions, and now we must take our understandings of an endarkened Catholic imagination and imagine the world in more inclusive and democratic ways, and then to go out into the world to act on and realize these more inclusive and democratic imaginings. No words can convey our sorrow at your passing, Deacon Moore, or how much you are missed and loved. I want to acknowledge and thank the many people who have helped to contribute to this first project in my work to record, to some degree, the immensity and profound significance of Deacon Moore's lifetime of service and art. For his kind patience, love, and support in all that I do, I am especially and deeply indebted to the one that my soul loves, my husband, LaShawn Harris. I also want to express my sincerest gratitude to my dear friend, fellow decorator, and sister in Christ, Miss Mary Moore Watkins, Deacon Moore's niece, and my love and thanks to Miss Cassie Moore, Deacon Moore's sister. I must also extend special thanks to the Blackman family, especially to Mrs. Charlotta Blackman, Miss Erika Blackman, and to Miss Alexis Coleman. Know it and go on out the yard. Go on.